We're going live now. Yeah, you should totally go live. Come and hang out. All right. Good evening, Albert's List. We are hoping that you are staying safe in this time of the coronavirus pandemic. And as we've come to you every week and all the weeks since we've been here, we're going to talk about the economy on this Friday evening. And we're going to talk about everything from the jobs report to the unemployment numbers to wondering when we're going to open up again. And we're all going to do it with a glass of wine and some alcohol because let's face it, none of these numbers are very sobering at the end of the day.
Oh,
And I'm
yeah.
going to pat myself on the back for that pun too while we're
That
at it.
was excellent, excellent pun game. For whatever your employer is paying you for your puns, it's not enough.
And so with me, I have here is Armando Milewski. He is the Alberts List economic analyst. And like me, he's been waking up every morning the last couple of weeks, and especially this week, crying over these economic numbers. Um,
Yeah.
and really, these aren't pretty at all. They're not very great. And I don't think and it's just and it's like getting a shot. It hurts, and it's probably going to hurt for a little bit. So for all
Yeah.
those of you watching, if you have any questions on where the economy is, put them in the comments section. If you want to talk about unemployment, put them in the comments section as well. But yeah, let's get to it.
Sure.
What is our country what's our country going through these days?
What I want to do actually to kick this off,
Sure.
to make sure use of like the fact that Zoom can do share screen. There's no better visual, really no better way I can like begin this than this visual, which is terrifying. So if you look at the state of our nation's economy,
Oh,
the headline of the New York Times today, um, literally it is off the charts, right? Like the numbers are so bad that it's a straight line drop down. This is what it looks like when I am doing my economic analysis and like running numbers through charts. Normally, if this happens, it means like I messed up the math. Um, right? Like it's like, that's like if I turn this in, back in the glory days when we were undergrads and I did econ as an assignment, like my professor would be like, "What? Clearly, like you messed up. Like there's a straight line going down here." But
and
this is real.
for all of the positive months of job gains that we were speaking of, and the constant asking of, oh, when is the next recession going to be here? When are we going to go to this economy where we maybe see a little bit of a drop? I mean, I think we've outdone ourselves. I didn't expect 20 million people out of work, but I expect maybe, six, 700,000. But holy cow, like,
I'll drink to that.
and you know what? I was looking through the entire jobs report today, and if there's one bright spot, I mean, it's the fact that companies like Costco and Walmart hired 93,000 people last month.
Yeah.
Other than that, it was everything was in the red, and not only was it in the red, but it was in the hundreds of thousands red. Like we're talking about 300,000 jobs here, 150,000 jobs there. And you're just going through the entire jobs report and you're like, okay, we get it, BLS. Thanks. I
Yeah.
copied and pasted the amount of jobs that we lost in pretty much every single area.
Hmm.
And let's see, what did I see exactly here? It was yeah, and you were even losing jobs in areas that you don't think you would lose jobs in. And so that's like stuff like healthcare and government and all of that. And you're just
Well,
wondering at this point,
healthcare is interesting.
yeah.
Finish your thought, and then we can dig into some of these sectors.
Yeah, I'm looking for the post that I made today. And for those of you who did, who have joined, um, talk to us. You're more than welcome to be scared, afraid, all of this stuff. But I mean, yeah, just some of the numbers, right? Employment
Yeah.
in leisure and hospitality plummeted by 7.7 million or 47%.
Yeah.
Employment declined in education and health by 2.5 million. Business and professional services down 2.1 million. Retail trade down 2.1 million. Manufacturing down 1.3. Other services, including personal and laundry services, by 1.3 million. Government employment by 980,000. Construction by 975,000. Financial activities by 262,000. Information by 254,000. Mining 46,000. And so, Armand, I feel like I'm in a horror movie here, and Michael Bay is about to start directing. And so,
God.
where are the bright spots? You know, like I think we're definitely in some kind of like recession here, but where are the bright spots, and what are we even doing at this point? You know, like even name brand companies are starting to go away. I believe Gold's Gym filed for bankruptcy this week. 24-hour Fitness is, I think, on the brink of filing for bankruptcy if they haven't done so already.
Yeah.
A personal favorite of mine, Soup Plantation and Sweet Tomatoes, announced that they will not be back after the pandemic. And so we're losing what I would have at least considered cornerstones of American culture and life, pieces of companies that were very deeply ingrained in the American lexicon, right? That we're going to
Yeah.
talk to our kids about in sociology class 30 years, 25 years from now, when they come home and they're like, Mommy, Daddy, tell me about Soup Plantation and 24-hour Fitness. And you're like, yeah, you know, when I was growing up, these were stalwarts of our economy. And I remember when I could get a membership at 24-hour Fitness, and I could do it by way of my Costco card. And now you can't do that anymore. I think this is making me depressed. I'm gonna have another sip of wine while you comment on that.
I think that's a very fair concern. And I hope, by the way, I want to say to folks in the comments, if you can ask questions, put in your thoughts, tell us how you're feeling. We want to make this as interactive as possible. So I wanted to show off this bookcase I have back here. But anyway, so a couple things, right? You asked about the bright spots, and I'm definitely concerned. I think, frankly, what we're seeing is less bright spots and more like less dark spots. So if we want to look at monthly changes in job by industry, what's interesting actually is that there are a couple things that are you would not expect. So for example, construction lost 975,000 jobs in April, which I expected to be a lot worse. I think it's a reflection of the fact that while most construction is shut down, there are things in construction that, for example, states have taken advantage of the fact that like there's less traffic, so they can do more construction work. Certain construction projects were halted because of other activity have been reactivated. And there's, I think, frankly, just more of a rush to do construction as people were hoping to get projects onto the market faster in anticipation of this collapse. That said, you know, the sectors that we're seeing the worst really, it's actually kind of brutal. If you combine education and health, you lost 2.5 million jobs. If you look at leisure and hospitality, it's 7.6 million. So it's by far the worst hit sector. The thing that's like really, I would say, particularly concerning to me is that we're now starting to see the second order effects. Like it made sense that in the beginning, all of the unemployment that really hit us was things that was directly tied to being shut down, right? Restaurants, leisure, hospitality, all of those were hit. But what you're starting to see is all the industries that were dependent on sort of the income from those industries are now beginning to suffer as well. So example of that, you know, you saw fitness companies, which are not directly like restaurants, don't usually have as short margins, but they can operate. So, you know, they can operate. But what you're also going to see is that like, there's a great example actually in the New York Times of a woman who worked in Austin and worked for a marketing company. And she didn't work in hospitality. She didn't work in leisure. She could work from home, but she got laid off because most of the clients of our firm were hospitality and leisure, right? And what you're going to see is, unfortunately, this causes what's called the negative fiscal multiplier, which is that as a negative economic effect happens, people get laid off, they spend less money, then those companies that relied on them for income are going to have to start laying people off. They're going to spend less money. And it's just getting worse and worse. And so I understand why there's a lot of political pressure to sort of reopen the economy because economic factors are are brutal. But what I want to point to is that, like, we can talk more about it later, but like this is happening even in places where like the virus has abated more, right? And so China, for example, has in theory, they've dealt with this longer. Some places are starting to open back up, but like people are still really afraid for very good reason. They're shopping less and so on. So there's the fear factor, but even putting aside the fear factors, there's also just the fact that like if you shut down for a period of time, that's income that's lost, right? Like the folks who were temporarily furloughed, and the jobs data shows that 78% of people who were unemployed in this period of time were temporarily furloughed. Unfortunately, it's very likely that the longer those temporary furloughs go on, the more likely they are to become permanent. And yeah, so it calls for, even if the virus like disappeared tomorrow, we've already lost time. We've already lost a lot of economic growth and activity, sorry. And it's pretty brutal.
Yeah, I mean, I think, right, you and I are kind of experiencing, I guess maybe we're such economic geeks that we're getting emotional ourselves and drowning ourselves in alcohol here to get through this moment. But so yeah, let's talk a little bit more about that light at the end of the tunnel, because the damage, the disaster has already been done. We're in the midst of what will be the worst, and we already in the worst recession that has ever hit the United States of America and probably the world by extension.
Yeah.
And so we're seeing it all happen. Like you were just talking about the multiplier, in that not only are we seeing this impact different industries, but we're also beginning to see how this is affecting government surpluses, which have been wiped out.
Right.
It's starting to affect how certain economies are going to grow or contract. I think I read the other day that Europe is probably expected to contract something like 15% in this quarter and then come back hopefully with 5% in the next quarter after. Um, and so with all of this in mind, how are we going to begin to recover? What is recovery going to look like? Because I hear on one hand, right, and Alex Buckman in the comments section asked this perfectly. I hear on one hand, companies are starting to begin opening up again. And even John Beck of Ursus on our earlier call this week on Tuesday, or on Monday or Tuesday it was saying that companies are starting to reach out again. And I'm starting to see a little bit of this too within my own network and community. But how is this going to look? I mean, obviously we've heard the V-shaped, the W-shaped recovery, whatever it might be. But what are we really looking at? What is the actual letter-shaped recovery that we're going to be looking at here?
So, as you might have noticed, I shared with you this document earlier, and like I'm building it's not nearly ready for public release yet, but I'm trying to build sort of an economic indicators dashboard, because there's a lot of broad projections, reports, so on, everything ranging from McKinsey to Zillow to government sources. There's a paper I wanted to get into tonight, utilizing private sources to sort of try to create more up-to-date data. Part of the issue for like all of these jobs reports is that they're a very lagging indicator, right? Like this jobs report is reporting on last month. Like things probably are a lot worse now. And so what are the things we're finding, to be frank, and it's not something I like saying because it's not very helpful, but it's like there's a broad range of uncertainty. And a good example of this is you were mentioning like budget deficits. So Governor Newsom of California released an estimate that California's weakness in economic growth is going to lead to a $54 billion deficit. 2 days later, the Legislative Analyst Office, which essentially does budget estimates on the legislative side, said, oh, it's going to be a $36 billion deficit. And it's like $20 billion gap for like a state government budget is a really big difference. And the truth is, like, one, frankly, there are three things I think are fundamentally are very uncertain. One, like, we don't know how this virus will progress, right? Like, it's a biological factor, how it go. Like, there's still a lot we don't know. Two, we don't know how people behave. One thing that's really interesting, if you look at data from open table reservations, where they'll show like how many restaurant reservations are being made or not being made, whether you're in a state that's locked down, quote unquote, or not locked down, the numbers are actually not that different. Like even in places like Georgia, which made a big hullabaloo sort of like opening back up, like, yes, some people are going out and continue to do things, but like most people are still afraid, like no matter what government does. And so they're not, there's a social psychological factor of like, what are people actually going to do? And then finally, there's also like, how will government respond? And how effective will those responses be? And so far, for example, I'm not super optimistic. Like the government rolled out this PPP program, which has been by and large kind of a debacle. It was super complicated. Different businesses applied. Some, like Ruth's Chris Steakhouse was shamed into correctly, I think, like giving it back, and like it's just the implementation has been really weak. The stimulus checks were like, again, because we tried to means test them, we made the implementation really complicated. A lot of people haven't gotten them. It took me forever to get them. It's just like the rollout. It's weird, actually. It's like government allocated a huge amount of money, but it's like not doing a very good job of spending it, which is why the thing I'm really optimistic about, if it happens, is right now they're trying to push through Democratic leaders of like a large stimulus package to fund the state budgets. And the reason I'm optimistic about that is not because states are inherently like better or whatever. It's more just they have already created these budgets. They've already like set up the plans, do all these things, spend this money. And so all the federal government has to do is like press a button, transfer the money to them. And so there's no real like implementation lag, right? And so the worry I have is like the more complicated we come up with different schemes to try to like inject money into the economy and put it in consumer hands, the more politicized it gets. Like unemployment insurance, because we rely on these really old systems, like a lot of folks have been struggling in Albert's list because like this stuff is programmed in COBOL. And like a lot of, frankly, states like Ohio are already like, they're putting in resources to create a website for like essentially snitching, where, well, if businesses reopen but workers are afraid to come back because they're sick, because they're worried about getting sick, they can get criminal penalties. And so it's been really frustrating. It's like, on one hand, it seems that the federal government and policymakers have implemented some programs, but on the other hand, like either they've executed them poorly, or they have like so little like ideological faith in sort of the ability of government to fix the economy that they're more likely to rely on this like reopening. But the issue of like reopening, even if tomorrow we like reopened and the virus disappeared, like we've lost a lot of time, right? And that's like, imagine if like 1 year of your life you just had to forego 2 months of your income. Like you're going to spend less, you're going to buy less, and then those people are going to lose their income, and those people are going to lose their income, right? And like it creates a negative cycle downwards. What we want right now is to create one upwards, especially because for the near term future, there are going to be two big factors. One, we're going to have to invest a lot more money to just change the way we do things, right? We need a lot more PPE. We need a lot more like remote work capability. Like you need to invest money to create an economy that functions in this coronavirus state. Um, but two is just like you need to make up for the lost time by getting the economy moving again, right? It's not enough to just like get back to normal. You now have to like catch up. And that's going to call for, policymakers at the state, federal level to act, but also individuals like governments, corporations. Like I'm seeing a lot of, one thing is reassuring, like there's a lot of like really interesting stuff happening in the private sector of companies like really moving quickly and adapting, and I think doing some really interesting things, especially I would say in the tech economy. I'm someone who criticizes tech all the time, but like there are things that like, Google has been reluctant to like really embrace remote work for a long time, which is ironic being Google, and now they've said that they're willing to take it up until 2021. Like,
Yeah, I saw that Facebook, I think, probably has an internal memo saying that employees can work at home for the rest of the year, which is pretty crazy to consider. And so I think
yeah.
that's a really good question in terms of who would be hiring right now, and what are the industries right now amid this carnage of employment? What are
So
people looking for at this point?
one thing I will say is that like there was this initial surge, right? And there will probably still be some more of the like, because people were panic buying, like grocers, Amazon, so on, were hiring like crazy, which made sense. But what we're seeing is like when you look at e-commerce trends and like the data on sort of retail, that trend has mostly faded away. Like you'll notice like shelves aren't like, people aren't fighting over toilet paper as much anymore, stuff like that. Like that initial panic buying wave has subsided. So this like immediate injection of like retail is probably not going to be sustained for a long time. But what you are seeing growth in is like Amazon, definitely, because they have delivery, anything that's like remote work, like places like Slack, Zoom. If you're looking at broad sectors that are going to be working, like anything that not only can work remotely, but like is more in demand because people are working remotely. But it's as niche as like, I've seen everything from like home workout stuff, like that industry, to as broad as like the communications technology that we use, like Zoom, for example, right? And like you're already seeing like Facebook for a long time neglected its video platforms and communications platforms, but because this has happened, like they've suddenly gotten to the arms race. So you can now do like social Facebook chats through video and stuff like that. And so those are the sectors that we're seeing like some growth in. And so I would say for an individual job seeker, that's probably the most promising. If you're trying to like recession proof yourself, or frankly at this point, depression proof yourself.
Depression proof yourself. My goodness.
I mean, those are the terms we're looking at. It's honestly, it's pretty sad.
Oh boy. Oh boy. Yeah. And so I was just thinking here, like, really cool to see some people I don't normally see on this, including our mutual friend Peter Lowe. It's good to see him
Cool.
here if he's
Hi,
watching
Peter.
still. And so yeah, I mean, so does that mean that if you are out of a job today, that now is kind of like the perfect time to go and learn how to code or learn how to figure out how to manage, cloud instances, things like that? Is it kind of the time for that now?
I would definitely say that acquiring new skills is definitely valuable. I would say that your priority should be make sure that you can sustain yourself for the near term. So like if you need help getting unemployment benefits, I've helped people navigate that. Getting any sort of financial supports. So getting laid off is tough. It's hard. It's especially hard to acquire new skills if you're worried about like getting evicted. So like figure out your basic safety net, and then like one thing I can I always recommend Calbright College. I work for 100% free online education for workforce development, job training, offering courses now in IT and cybersecurity. And then, like there are different platforms. I personally have been learning coding. I've been taking the Stanford class online called Coding in Place over the last few weeks, learning Python, which has been really fun. But I also recommend, like, given how tough things are, not necessarily like learn to code is like this very big, broad umbrella. One thing I think is helpful for folks is to find like the careers that are growing right now that are adjacent to your existing skill set. So for example, if you do like marketing, learning like better aspects of marketing automation, Marketo, those platforms, like find and there's actually tools and resources I can add later in the sections which are like good about finding like, I would urge people to not necessarily think of like total career shifts and changes, but instead be like, what do I currently have? What can I currently do? And if it's not really right now like meeting the market needs, what are the 1, 2, or 3 things I can learn and add to my toolkit that will get me there, rather than being like, how do I completely reinvent myself? And I found that for many people actually in our learning instruction programs, the big obstacle that they face is that they're like, oh, I know I need to learn to code, but that's like seems like a massive giant commitment, and I'm never going to do that. Versus if you're like, oh, you should learn how to do this specific type of like Salesforce automation, or take these 3 classes in a digital marketing, that's a lot easier. So finding things that are skills adjacent. Yeah.
That's good tips. I think that's, as long as we're in the midst of this and we're looking to, getting into that until recovery happens. And even like, if you're able to, right, go door to door and cut people's hair. I mean, that's even a business at this point.
Well, don't do that.
How long my hair has gone at this point.
Hey, we at Helper Source do not condone illegal activity. So depending on what the rules are in your local county. What I would say though, actually, one type of innovation. So the way I got my haircut was that I am quarantining with my lovely girlfriend, and I have a lovely friend who is a hairstylist. And what she did was she did a Zoom call, and she walked my girlfriend through how to cut my hair, and it actually came out. I mean, I think it looks pretty good.
I think it looks pretty good for Zoom.
And it was actually like a good like experience. She like talked us through it, and like it was like, a lot of the reason that people, for example, pay for like a live streamed yoga class or even like went to real yoga classes, you could watch a YouTube video and get the information for free. But what you do is you want the combination of like social experience and the action, right? And someone to like look at you specifically, give you individualized attention. So that might be, especially if you're an entrepreneur or have entrepreneurial talent or skills. Like I think one thing to think of is like, how do I reinvent my existing skill set for a more socially distanced economy?
I agree.
There's actually a website called you probably need a haircut.com, which set up this, they set up this model where they like connect people to hairstylists, and literally through Zoom, like they walk people through their haircuts.
Well, there you go. There's the innovation point. And so I think the other question I want to also ask next is, and I've seen this in some of the comments within our posts, is that while we're looking at 20.5 million jobs being lost, the stock market continues to rise and go up.
Yeah.
And so can you talk a little bit about why that's the case, first of all? And second, whether that's actually reflective of what's going on in the market right now.
So this is actually something that's really stumping me too, honestly. It was like really strange. Like, why is
the Dow was up 2% today, right?
Right.
I made over 2% on my own investments today, while the unemployment rate was, being hiked up at least 10% month over month. And we know that this has been an ongoing trend for the last like month and a half since we hit bottom on March 18th to March 24th.
Yeah. I mean, there are a couple things at play here. No one really, part of the issue is like understanding the stock market is like, the only way you could really know is if you literally like sat down with every single person who like bought or sold and asked them, why did you do it? Which you can't, but the educated guesses we can make are a couple of factors. One, frankly, I just think investors are a little more optimistic than they should be. I think this is such an unprecedented event that many people kind of are just like not really grappling with, like, it's so big it blows your mind, right? Like you saw that chart earlier, it broke off the charts. Like it's hard for folks to really envision what that's going to look like. And I think that's compounded by the fact that like a lot of political leadership is sort of predicting this idea that like it'll be a V-shaped recovery, right? Like go down and
there's a lot of irrational exuberance going on right now.
I honestly think so. And I think it's compounded by the fact that you're seeing a lot of retail investors enter, right? Like a lot of folks, I think because like, it makes sense to, if you have a little bit of money, to invest in a recession, because in the long run, the economy will recover. But that like immediate jump of people, I think, meant there are a lot of people in the market who aren't necessarily the most sophisticated investors. There's also like, there's, federal intervention, like the Federal Reserve is providing liquidity and credit. So one of the reasons last time that the Great Recession collapsed the stock market for so long is because it was a recession driven by like financial uncertainty, right? Like the housing market collapsed, a bunch of assets were based on the housing market. And so all these banks, trading entities were full of uncertainty. And so it's directly channeled from the stock market into the economy. In this case, the flow is the opposite. Like the economy's not doing well. And so investors are trying to like figure out based off of that, how they should act. But, it's a fundamentally different recession. And so if you provide liquidity,
it is, and because
capital,
I think I want to say that like, this is money and dollars that the Federal Reserve is creating that will never exist in the form of physical currency, that is not backed by gold, whatever conspiracy theories you have on that side. And and is literally being shuffled from one computer to another computer.
Right. I mean, to be clear, like gold is a bad alternative, right? Because there's a limited amount of it. Like gold, we should never. It's good that we have a fiat currency, or at least it's better than gold. I'm not going to talk about crypto because I honestly don't have the expertise. But what I would say is that like the Federal Reserve is able to sustain, like, essentially by offering loans that are cheap to financial entities, sustain this for a while. But like that can't, if the real economy continues to crater, you're going to see the stock market eventually reflect it. And I think part of it is driven by the fact that there's like all this optimism around like, oh, we'll reopen and things will go back to normal. You saw this reflected actually in the unemployment data that I pointed. Are you there, Albert?
I'm here.
I think you froze. You just like, so you saw this in the unemployment data where it said 78% of people describe themselves who are unemployed as temporarily furloughed. Like, I think those people, all the evidence I'm seeing indicates that is not going to be a temporary furlough. Mm-hmm. But folks are just overly optimistic, unfortunately. That said, I could be wrong. A lot of it also depends on like what the government's going to do. Part of it too, the reason you see this gap is like unemployment is a lagging indicator, right? It's telling us what happened a month ago. Stock market is the leading indicator. It's telling us what investors think is going to happen a few months from now. So it could very well be the case that maybe things do get a lot better and investors are correct in predicting that. But all the stock market is essentially a prediction. The final thing I'd add, I know I've been rambling a little bit. I think it's the drink, but is that part of this stock index is like what we didn't notice is that over a long period of time, I would say last 5 years or so, more so, as tech companies have become more valuable, they've become much more weighted in the stock market index. Yep. And so a little bit's distortionary because like Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Facebook, like all those companies are doing relatively well. And because they make up a disproportionate weight in that index, it's like not reflecting how the economy's doing, right? Like
yeah, because I think what I've noticed is that like a lot of tech companies have definitely come roaring back. And even tech companies that are new entrants are doing really well too. For example, and by the way, for those of you watching, none of this is stock advice. You still must do your research.
Yeah, do your own research.
And whatever past performance you've experienced, positive or negative, is not an indicator of future results. And I am certainly not your stockbroker, nor am I your lawyer. So consult both before making that. But getting back to it, for example, right, like Peloton saw the biking, the spin bike company saw their profits go up 66% this last quarter because of the lockdown and everything.
I mean,
Microsoft, Apple,
my
Google.
girlfriend bought a Peloton as soon as this happened.
Right? I bought myself I guess what's billed as a Peloton killer this morning. So I'm getting a spin bike in my own house as well.
What is the Peloton killer?
It's the Schwinn IC4 or the Bowflex C6. Also, not product endorsements, by the way, if you're watching.
that said, if any company wants to, by the way, this is also not
sponsor this Zoom call. They're more than welcome to.
Yeah,
sponsors
if they want to sponsor
at ajobless.com. So just reach out there.
100% willing to sell out, please, whatever product, like.
But yeah, Peloton's doing well. Apple, Google, Microsoft, they're all at their pre-pandemic prices at this point, and it's really fascinating. Yeah,
I would say the two companies of the tech industry that are doing a little bit relatively worse. They're still fine because they're giant, powerful entities, but Facebook and Google, because unlike a lot of other companies, they're really reliant on advertising revenue. And when the larger economy is weaker, the first thing that companies cut from their budget is advertising dollars. That's why Yelp is also, Yelp especially, because their ad dollars rely on like restaurants, is just really brutally struggling. It's the same for Airbnb, right? Like they're relying on tourism. And so Airbnb has announced something like, a quarter of their massive layoffs. Then Lyft announced 20% layoffs. Uber's announcing 14% layoffs. Those tech companies that rely on things that social distancing prevents, like travel, restaurants, like advertising, those are getting hit pretty hard.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, yeah, I mean, if you're a performance marketer right now, it's not necessarily the best place to be. If you're a content writer, I think things are still okay. My life is busier than ever, and I'm a content writer by day. If you're a social media person, you still have a job. If you're a product marketer, you still have a job because you got products to sell. If you're in sales, it's still a little bit harder to, I think, move forward with all of that. And so, with all of that in mind, what else are you reading? I think you mentioned a PDF or some document earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like some really interesting new data being created that, or data being observed that gives us like a better understanding of the economy. So economist Aruj Shetty, who's really good, well known for like education economics, has been able to access a compilation of like private data sets, so like credit card companies, payroll companies, things that gives us more of a real-time access. I still need to fully read this paper, so I don't want to like talk off, talk a little too broadly, but there's also companies like MC and Burning Glass, which do real-time job analytics. And what they do is they scrape websites like Indeed.com, LinkedIn, and so on. They use machine learning algorithms to sort of give us a real-time sense of like how the job market is performing. And so that allows us to, know a little bit faster than like the government data, which has unfortunately lag. And so that's some of the stuff I've been reading. Some of the other things I think that are interesting, McKinsey did a consumer sentiment survey, which I think will tell us a little bit more about the long run. There are a couple of notes here that I thought were really fascinating, is like about sort of how the economy is going to go forward in the future. So one is that like consumer optimism has declined pretty rapidly. Only 33% of Americans now believe that the economy is going to rebound in 2 to 3 months, versus as recently as March 16 to 17, the number is 44%. Wow. So consumer pessimism has just like really fallen apart. You're also starting to see, if you look at spending data, so while spending is still below pre-COVID-19, if you look at spending intent, like what are you intending to buy? There are actually a couple of categories where it's improved significantly. The obvious ones are groceries. A little less obvious is snacks, but I was like, okay, that makes sense. Snacks. But also like entertainment at home shot up by 11, right? So if you're an entertainment content producer, that has increased significantly. The other ones that were kind of surprising.
The problem with that is like in the long run, and I'm not trying to bag on content producers in the entertainment space, is that a lot of these projects are greenlit by people who have the money to invest in that. And if those people aren't making any money anymore, again, like the multiplier you were saying earlier, that's going to impact everything down the line. And so I think if this pandemic goes for the 18 months that people are talking about it's going to go, we're literally going to have a government that's creating money from thin air to try to like support people from here on out.
Well, I mean, the thing is, again, to be clear, government always creates money out of thin air, right? Like money has only as much value as we all collectively agree it has. That's sort of how fiat currency
but like
works.
we have to also say, like, it used to be that every single dollar we created was backed by the gold standard, by gold that existed at Fort Knox. When President Nixon took us off the gold standard in 1974, that meant that we could create money, I guess, to our own pleasure and delight. And so, because if you look at your dollar bill now, it says that this is just recognized as legal tender, whereas money back in the day said that this was backed by gold or backed by something. And so it's definitely a new world out there. I think what we've discovered in the last month and a half is that our economy is extremely fragile, and it's very worrisome, but also very indicative of who we are as a people.
Let's take a step back on the gold standard stuff. Like, the thing, I hear this stuff a lot, and I just like really want to. So, the gold standard was really bad. Okay, like the reason it's really bad is because when we have the gold standard, this is like the oldest take in economics. What you're basically saying is the entirety of the value of our economy should be based around the physical amount of this shiny stuff in the world. And then if suddenly somewhere in the world somebody finds a bunch of this new shiny stuff, the entire value of our economy is like altered by that. But also if this shiny stuff, like a lot of it gets destroyed, our economy is also altered by that. It's all tied to, like, the reason gold had value. People are like, well, but money's not backed by anything. It's only backed by what we believe in it. But then you're like, well, why is gold backed by? Well, it's pretty, right? And we decide that it has value, right?
Yeah, ultimately, why couldn't we back gold by poppies or, logs of wood?
I mean, I would frankly prefer a puppy-based economy, but
I was just making the comment of poppies.
Poppies.
Yeah, like what the poppy boom in the Netherlands in the 17th century.
Yeah. What's important to think about here is, like, I actually think it's like super key that government does keep injecting more money into the economy, but we do it in smart ways, because what we have seen is that, like, when people do have money to spend, or invest, people have been pretty creative about adapting, right? Like, to this new economy. Restaurants change their business models to do more takeout. People do more live streaming, online entertainment. Like, I do have a decent amount of faith, and the data bears it, that, like, we do have this big structural change, but if we allow it to basically, like, make us all poor and, like, we don't have any money to spend, and you ground the economy down to a halt, people will be concerned because they're like, oh, you can't keep printing money forever. Like, I'm not advocating for that. Well, what I am advocating for is, we suddenly saw this huge decline in economic activity because of a large external threat. We now have to make a structural change to how our economy is oriented. Some of that has to be government policy decisions, right? You need to invest in, like, infrastructure, like broadband. I think there are, like, things about occupational licensing that change that are really great, which are, like, it used to be very, very hard if you got a license as a nurse in another state to practice as a nurse in California. And for years, that was a huge obstacle. And then suddenly there's a crisis where, like, maybe we should make that easier, right? So, like, there are government policy changes you can make to make sort of supply side reforms to allow for more innovation. But there's also if you just pour the money in the economy so people have the currency to spend and invest, the businesses will adapt and adjust and then create new forms of economic activity that are better adapted to this world. That said, you can't keep doing that forever, because eventually money, like government printing money, the way I really want people to think about it, is essentially just a lever. It moves up and down and then the economy responds to it, like real people respond to it. And then if everybody's employed at a job and you're dumping more money in and you can't produce more, then you start getting inflation because you're getting more money chasing the same amount of goods and people. But when there are people not working, there are factories sitting idle, there's capital not being utilized, then not pouring more money in means that you're putting those people off the sidelines and back into work, right? Inflation happens when you're just printing money, but there's nothing for it to do, right? An example of inflation is probably like SF's housing market, where more money is coming in, but because you're not building more housing, all it does is just keep on bidding up the price of existing housing. But
because
most of our
everybody is willing to pay more, because if they want to live in a 7x7, square mile area, you want to take the highest bidder for all of that. So absolutely.
So that's an example of where adding more money into the supply is not the solution, not the sole solution, because you need to actually make it legal to build more housing. But there are also instances where, so that's a supply side problem, and there are also demand side problems, which are just that, like, there's plenty of people willing to produce, like, food right now, willing to produce like all the stuff we were producing before, all face masks. It's just like people need to have the money to buy it. So that's a demand side problem. And so there's supply and there's demand, and we need to address both. But I want to get to, do you have any questions in the comments? I know we've been kind of...
Yeah, no, I think we've just had some comments. Chai made a comment about how to answer a specific question at Amazon that I think is actually better for our Monday mock interviews.
Yeah.
Saidi says that demand for touch-free tech has spiked for visitor management companies. So instead of signing in on an iPad, you will scan your ID or QR code if you're a pre-registered guest. I think what I'm listening to you in terms of this conversation, and also it's very similar to, we're going into a lot of debt. We're going ourselves into deep budget deficits. You had mentioned a couple of weeks ago on your own personal Facebook that while a lot of us are worried about, the
Mhm.
government going into deep deficit and debt, and that the wrong approach to take to all of this is to look at the government as if we were our own gigantic household of
Yeah.
320 million people. Can you sort of explain
Sure.
and tell our viewers who are watching this now and later why that's a poor approach to take when it comes to looking at government debt and government deficits?
So I find it a little funny. I actually got a little nervous because I'm like, usually we don't get this political on this not podcast, but live stream where normally I try to stick to less. But
Yeah, I
I
mean, I
guess
know, I
it's a
understand it. Yeah,
yeah. But
yeah.
the nature of the
And it
time
might be the
calls for
wine
some
speaking. I'm definitely a little buzzed right now, I'll admit. And so I guess as the more
sure.
buzzed I get, the more economically, I guess, inquisitive I
Mhm.
become. So for those of the folks who are watching, you can totally laugh at it. I've been enjoying this Chardonnay. It's a bottle of wine from Trader Joe's. Only cost me $5 last week. And
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, the economic situation right now is depressing. And so I'm taking a very unsobering approach to it. But Armand, back to you.
So one way I think I find helpful to delineate or differentiate the two is that like when you're an individual, no matter how wealthy you are, like even Bill Gates, even Jeff Bezos, you are only a small fraction of this large economic whole. And so your
Yeah.
ability to affect it by your actions is pretty small. And so you really want to think about your own budgeting based off of primarily how it affects your household. When you are the United States government, it's such a large entity and you print your own currency, especially because you're printing your own currency, you're not like the money you're taking in through taxes or spending out of taxes is not really like money you're like earning or money that you are saving. It's really just decisions you're making about how to structure the economy, right? Like you are such a big mover in this market of the United States that really what you're saying is, and sometimes they get it wrong, right? Like they get it wrong often. Um, and so there are times when the economy is growing where you have what's called the crowding out effect, where a government, if it spends too much during a period of growth, actually causes interest rates to rise because it starts competing with private market like allocations of capital. So an example, let's say like during the heat of the tech boom, federal government decided it really needed to hire a bunch of software engineers because there's only so many software engineers in the country. All you'd really do is start like one, you take away software engineers from like productive activities in the market, but two, you start bidding up their price. But in a recession, when the government is not choosing not to spend, what it's basically saying is that person who's not working should not be doing anything, right? Because the choice isn't they're going to work in a private sector job or they're going to like the alternative isn't private sector job, the alternative is nothing. And so often I find it's helpful to sort of get away from the abstraction of like money and dollars and cents and just think about it from a like what is actually happening in the economy right now.
Mhm.
And like what's happening is like 20 million people are not cooking food, they're not doing economic activity, they're not doing their job because they can't, because they're unemployed. And so the reason it's important for the government to essentially like pour money into the economy is to re-inject it. It's like an engine, you want to get it restarted again. And a well-managed economic like action is that once it starts getting going again, you don't have to keep adding as much gas, right?
Yeah.
And so it's sort of like since we did this in the 1930s, 1940s, like World War II was really what got us out of the Great Depression. Government intervention done intelligently, and the details are very complicated, and it's like you can do it wrong during an economic recession. Like there's a reason why it's so cheap, for example, for the government to borrow right now. Like interest rates for government borrowing are literally negative because investors have so few private market opportunities that they're willing to give government money even at a loss because they're like, well, a certain loss of like 1% is better than like what will likely be like a loss of 20% if I park it anywhere else. So like in that instance, it's actually irresponsible for government not to spend because what government is essentially saying is all of these people and all of these resources we have to produce economic activity should stay inactive. And like that's time lost. That's stuff that could be made, activities that could be done that are just wasted. And I'm not saying like that means we should spend it on anything or do anything. You need to be smart about it. But I am saying that it's actually like less fiscally prudent to do nothing or like to cut spending, because what you're essentially saying is like all of these people and these resources need to not do anything, right? Like think about it this way. It'd be like saying, I don't have a job, therefore I should like, well, it costs me money to get to my job, right? Like, therefore I should like not work because it's a tough time, so I should save money. Well, like you're not working, so you're going to lose more money. Like spend the money on the gas so you can get to your job, right? And government basically saying we should cut spending during a recession is saying, I'm not going to put gas in my tank. You're like cutting off your nose to spite your face because you're not working and you're not generating revenue. I feel like I've gone through like 30 different metaphors. Hopefully one of them stuck.
I mean, yeah, I think like as we discuss the state of the economy here, it's important to be able to address each of these one by one. And we are almost at the top of the hour, and I know you have your own happy hour to get to. And
I
so as
do.
we conclude, this podcast or slash this video, um, what should our members be looking for in the next couple of months, weeks ahead, whether you're watching this now or on YouTube? What are some things that you should be paying attention to as states begin to open up again, as both the president and politicians try to make comments about the economy running at full speed versus what the actual truth is? How do you separate that truth from hype as the weeks go forward?
I mean, I think the best thing to do is to look at like actual real indicators of economic performance, right?
Yeah.
Politics is the art of spin, and you're going to see politicians both sides of the aisle try to create a story or a narrative. But what is sort of closer to the truth? Data is never perfect, but at least it is a number is a number, and it's like
Yeah.
there's not a left wing number, a right wing number, just a number. I would say like look at the actual economic performance, and specifically in your area, in your sector. What is the industry you're in? And we can provide, like if folks have questions, I'm happy to provide. There's so many data sets that I can't like broadly speak on it, but like Bureau of Labor Statistics is a great place. EDD, which is California's like equivalent, is a good place for it. I'd say keep your eye on sort of like what the numbers are actually saying, and use that to guide you. And what I'd say is like right now, if you're in an industry that is, tied to or reliant on revenue from an industry that is like really being hit, like leisure, hospitality, or restaurants, or so on, that is a warning sign, right? Like those are the canary in the coal mine. You've got enough leeway to know, oh, I still got my job now, but like you're likely the next domino to fall. And I would say either if you have your own business, try to diversify your clientele beyond those, or if you're working in a place that's reliant on that, try to figure out, don't leave your job, but like figure out potential exit strategies if you do end up getting laid off. And start networking for it, rely on resources like Albert's List, help you guide you in your career, Calbright College to learn skills,
I guess
stuff like
this
that.
this live video is now brought to you by Calbright College. Your next degree in
Unofficially,
tech
I'm
for
not
free.
here. I'm not here in any official capacity.
Yeah.
So I don't want nothing I say reflects on the college itself. I'm just here as a private citizen. That said, I think they're great. I'll
We are
work
we are
there.
doing well as private citizens because we're looking to make the most and help out people as we go through these chaotic times. And so, as we conclude, Armand, I want to thank you for this time again, coming on this
Yeah.
video and really being able to talk to everyone here. Because I know there's so much uncertainty going on. There's so much fact and fiction, flying around. And so, I too, like you, hope that this will be over sometime soon. But we also hope that, we can all go back into society doing what we want to do in a safe capacity where we don't
Yeah.
have to fear that we're going to come home with coronavirus and infect everyone from our loved ones to our pets and beyond. And so,
Yeah.
with that said, do you have any final thoughts around, how people should approach this economy going forward? And maybe, what are the biggest hope and what are the biggest numbers that we can look at going ahead here as we head into really the rest of May and what we hope to be a prosperous, summer and spring?
Well, the first thing you should do is follow me on twitter.com/armandoma or subscribe to my newsletter, armanddomilewski.com/a-list is the, I think is one easy way to do it, but it's in the link in the Facebook post. But I don't know. Honestly, it's a time. I think honestly, the biggest lesson I can take away for people is like, if there's anyone looking you in the eye and saying, I absolutely know what's going to happen, do not trust them.
Yeah.
Like more than anything else, like times like these really reaffirm like our intellectual humility. And the people I trust most are the people who look at the evidence, but also remind you constantly that we are in uncertain times. Anyone up there telling you like, I know what's going to happen, it's totally 100% this way, like they're selling you snake oil. And you can't trust those people. You can only trust, you know, like you can only trust like, I don't know, like the evidence you can see, the folks you're looking at it with you, but like trust people who have the humility to admit that we're living in a time of enormous uncertainty. I know you and I are willing to admit that, and we're helping folks guide through it. And we're understanding that we're all in this with you, and we're all trying to figure out with you, and hopefully we can get through it together. So I can give Albert a big hug in person.
It'll be good when we don't have to socially distance and see each other again. For those of you who are watching, Armand and I have known each other since, actually, you and I have known each other since the last recession. So, you know, our friendship now transcends recessions and go between that. And so thank you again, Armand, for your intellect and your wisdom as usual. For those of you who are watching, thank you for joining us. We hope you've learned something during this time. And so, you know, we're heading into this weekend. I'm especially looking forward to this Friday, mostly because I get a little bit of time off and just, you know, don't have to think about life too much and have to, you know, can wait until Monday to get back to it. If you're watching this video, thank you for joining us for as long as you have. I hope you've learned something during this time. And so as COVID-19 continues, I hope you continue joining us for many of the videos that we have ongoing. Next Monday, we have our conversation, which is a mock interview with Colin Moe and Corey Hiramoto of CareerShakers.com. Colin is a creative writer, so if you're in the creative space, join us for that mock interview. And then on Tuesday, we have a conversation with a Forbes 30 under 30. He founded an app called Access Bell, and he's going to talk about how to make the most of your networking conversation in just 15 minutes as you look for that next job. So we look forward to seeing you join us then. And until then, you know, stay safe, do what you can to make the most of the quiet and reflection of these times, and best of luck. And so until then, we'll see you in the community with your job search questions, your advice, and your introductions, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Albert. Take care.